A very warm welcome to you.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to join you all, even though I'm at a distance. Thank you. I was seeing somebody's back there. Okay. Look, it's great to see all of you, and I just listened in to the tail end of the last session. Made me a little nostalgic. I saw some familiar people out there. So let me first of all begin by giving you all my greetings and to tell Manoj and everybody else out there that I miss being there, but there are important things going on in India right now, so I'm sure you'll understand. What I'd like to do is perhaps speak a little bit about where I see the India-UK relationship going. And then perhaps we could set it up for some questions. I'd be happy to take them. So let me begin, first of all, by congratulating everybody there for the opportunity to watch the World Cup. I think it's a very appropriate time when the World Cup's going on to talk about Indo-UK relations, because in many ways, cricket is one of the symbols of our relationship. It speaks for the choices that we made after 1947 on how we're going to deal with each other. And really, if you look back at the last 70 odd years, what you have in terms of the Indian choices are a model which is democratic, which is pluralistic, which is based on a market economy, which subscribes to a rule-based global order. And the changes that you have in India during this period, which among other things is expressed in political, in general elections every few years, those changes are quite unique, because that change and the sort of the scale of the growth that you see, there are very few countries that have really attempted those in a democratic framework. And I make that point because I think today, when we look at so much of our shared past, present, and future, I would actually say that we tend to take at times democratic values and our shared way of looking at the world. Sometimes we tend to take it for granted. So I think that's something which perhaps needs some reflection and perhaps even, shall I say, today, a degree of attention, because the world, is not as homogeneous as we used to think it was. Just as I speak of shared values and common ways of looking at the world, I also think it's important to recognize some of the shared challenges. And particularly here, I would single out the challenge of terrorism. I think today, the days when people either thought that an act of terrorism somewhere was not my problem because it didn't involve me, I think those days are today behind us. We have to accept today that all over the world, the bad guys talk to each other, and it's important that the good ones do as well. We can't segment the world into safer parts and less safe parts. I think there are global issues. It is in many ways a world, even if globalization is under stress, I think most sensible people do accept today that whether it's terrorism, whether it's climate change, there are issues on which it's very important for all of us to work together, and I point that out. The UK is a very important economic partner of India. Our bilateral trade today is somewhere in the range of $22–23 billion. The UK is among the key foreign investors. I think it's third or fourth. The stock of capital in India, again, is in excess of $15 billion. But also, I think there is a recognition today that India is an important investor and a job creator in the UK. And in many ways today, this is, when I look at the world, among the major relationships that we have in the world, to me, this is a particularly important relationship because it is a two-way street. I think we both have concerns that need to be continuously addressed if we are to go forward. And certainly, while I would say the economic story has been good, there is clearly room for more progress there. Looking at other parts of the relationship, I think again there is a growing appreciation in both countries of the the fruits of working together, whether it's in research, in areas like pure science and health. I think the academic interactions between us are growing, but again, the sort of theme I would highlight there is the very strong people-to-people connect that we have. I think the Indian diaspora today, particularly the diaspora in UK, certainly would be among the strongest global bridges that we have, and the value that I place on their contribution and their role in bringing the two societies together really can't be overstated. The story of Indian students perhaps is a little more mixed. We've actually seen a decline in numbers, and I think that's again a subject worth some thought because when to my mind, students are an investment which is worth making for any relationship. When we speak of UK, there are really different UKs that we all deal with. There is the shared history UK that we have. There is the normal, state-to-state, society-to-society relationship. I spoke of the diaspora connect. I think the city of London has a very special place in the scheme of things. In many ways, the UK has been a financial gateway for India. There is the global UK as well. The United Kingdom has a lot of influence in different parts of the world. It is a UN Security Council member. We have developed a fairly good record of working on the big issues of the day. But I think today, as UK stands at the cusp of change with the choices that it needs to make on Brexit, there is naturally a lot of thinking. I mean, in India to some degree, but a lot of that would depend on the choices which would be made in UK about what the future holds for us. And my own sense is that whatever other choices, the relationship has to look at the possibilities that are inherent in those choices. So let me now switch to actually what's happening in India, other than the general election, about which I will say a few words. If I were to sort of sum up the change in India, one way of doing that would be to highlight the fact that today you have a 3 trillion minus economy moving towards a 5 trillion plus level in a fairly short space of time. And that kind of scale of change, really the world in recent times has only seen in China. So I would expect the changes in India would have Indian characteristics. They would be different. This journey that I'm talking about, China made perhaps a little more than a decade ago. But I highlight that because there will be new demands coming out of India. There'll be new opportunities which will come out of India. And these are not just economic opportunities. I think given the fact that these changes are happening today, there will be technology consequences to it. There'll be social consequences to it. A lot of the change is not just pure growth and numbers. I think if one looks, for example, at the change in society in India, the Human Development Index numbers moving up, today, a lot of that is captured in national campaigns. I mean, you are going to see a more digital India, a more environmentally conscious India, a more gender conscious India, an India which will urbanize in a more, I would say, strategized manner, an India which will push up rural incomes with all the possibilities of all the consequences of that. And in India, which really will look at promoting a sharper startup culture. So when I present that picture to you, I think you would be right in sort of wondering, okay, so where's the Indian model in all of that? And my sense again is that you will get a sort of an all of the above model. I mean, you would have more manufacturing in India. There would obviously be more services in India, but you would have some very uniquely Indian ways of growing, ways of broadening the economy, which making it much more participative. And I mention all of this because to me, each of these opens up a new avenue of collaboration and frankly, a new possibility of business. So finally, let me wrap up my remarks with a few words on the mandate which the government under the leadership of Prime Minister Narendra Modi has got. I think frankly, by any standards, it's a very impressive mandate. I think for a lot of people, the numbers would have exceeded expectations. But if one were to stop and think about what this election was about, to me at least, it was a vote of aspirational India. It was a very clear message that those who are most disadvantaged in India today have been touched by the change, do expect a better life. In many ways, it was a vote of hope. It was an endorsement of the change that is already underway. So my message to you today would be, there is a new India in making. That new India offers new opportunities. I believe that the India-UK relationship should refashion itself to address that new India and take advantage of the opportunities that would unfold. So thank you for your attention. I'd be very, very happy to take a few questions.
Dr. Jaishankar, we're grateful for your time and it's wonderful to see you. Thanks for joining us today. I know there'll be many questions from the floor of the conference today, but I just wondered if you could elaborate a little. You talk about that massive scale of change and how you make sure that the social impact of that and the inclusivity of that for everyone in India is felt. Just tell me a little bit more about what you intend to do and what the government will do to make sure that that pace of change doesn't leave people behind.
I think today, let me, in a sense, look even at the outcomes of the first term. If one were to analyze the votes which were polled in the elections which have just taken place, actually the support which has been extended to the ruling party conveys the sense that those who had been left behind in the past clearly have invested their hopes in the government. Now, you could argue the first time around, you are in a sense, it's a vote of trust in a way. But if you do that in a re-election, I think that's a fairly clear sign that in those 5 years, somewhere there's been a big change in their lives. Because, typically people vote the second time with much more, shall I say, in a much more grounded, in a much more realistic way. So I would, in fact, when you speak about how inclusive it would be, or how would you make sure that it would have the widest possible coverage, I think the record in the political endorsement coming out of the election itself speaks for that. But having said that, I would urge you to look at a lot of the efforts underway. Today, I'm just giving you one example. If you look at the digital tools that are available, by which actually the government is hastening progress in many areas, reaching out to people who normally would be beyond the sort of zone of contact in many ways. Whether it is today people's bank accounts, today the fact that they get payments that are due to them the fact that they are made aware of many of their rights and many of the schemes, the fact that there's delivery on a lot of that, I think all those have cumulatively made a huge impact.
Let's talk too about, you touched on building relations and continuing the relations that India has around the world, particularly when it comes to trade. I was looking at the latest numbers. India's got clearly a growing influence on the world stage and growing ambition, but the smallest diplomatic service per capita than any other country. And I find this really interesting because how do you sway government policy? How do you sway and influence the people that you need to meet, that you need to shake hands with, that you need to do deals with such a small diplomatic service? I mean, how would you rectify that?
Well, if you're expecting me to argue with the point that I need a larger ministry, I'm not going to argue. Okay? But having said that, I do want to point out something. Look, to some extent, this is an overstated argument because the Indian system has a particular way of counting who are diplomats. And the number which is bandied about, which is 1,000 plus minus, that's the narrowest definition of what are diplomats. Actually, probably our head count is about 4.5 times, maybe 5 times that number. So, but having said that, I'm not really arguing with you. I do think, some changes are underway. We are opening more missions in Africa, and the government is committed to providing more resources and more human resources for that. Certainly, with our global interests expanding, there is a case to have a larger global footprint. And I see this as one of the challenges in my current job, which is to persuade the rest of the government that they're actually making a good investment in expanding our global footprint.
I can't let you go without talking about the B word, the Brexit word, that we've been discussing a little here this morning. So forgive me for asking you, but where does India fit into the Brexit negotiation? Because increasingly we talk about walls going up, we talk about the challenges of trade in the UK right now. If the UK comes to India and says, look, we're suddenly interested in doing even more business with you, what's the Indian response?
Well, look, I have never said no to anybody ever in my life who wants to do more business, Brexit or no Brexit. But I think a lot of it, frankly, for the world to react when the UK itself has not entirely made clear the directions and the pace in which it's going, I think that's a bit premature. So I'd be very happy to answer the question the next time around when everything has kind of come together. But I do want to say this, that the India-UK relationship is really a very, very solid relationship. I saw that when I was in the government, and the period when I was out of government and in business, my convictions in that regard were only reinforced. So whatever the choices UK makes, I think insofar as the relationship is concerned, we need to look at the new landscape and say, okay, what are the new opportunities in that? Because my sense is in every conceivable scenario, there will be a different set of opportunities. So we have a degree, it's not just that our systems are meshed and, a lot of it is, a lot of what we do, the way we work is based on our shared history. I think today when we look at the rest of the world, there are opportunities there for us to work together. So I'm very sanguine about working together, growing business. But if you want to get down to details, you'll have to first make up your own mind where you work.
I admire your optimism that we may be here this time next year and things will all have come together. But Dr. Jayanta, bear with us while I'd love to open this up to some questions from the floor. So just bear with us while we get microphones to the guests so that they are able to speak to you. I wonder if there are any hands here. There's a lady there at the back who would like to ask a question. If you could also identify yourself as well, please, that would be useful.
Good afternoon, Dr. Jaishankar. My name is Ratun Lahiri, and I'm from the venture capital industry. So my question, I think, is particular to that industry. Just as, there's an India-Israel Innovation Fund, the I4F, I was wondering whether, you or the government, has any such initiatives, for the UK, particularly in the social impact sector? Because there are many Indians, first-generation Indians like me, who received a world-class education in India, in institutes like the IIT, almost free, in my days, and we'd like to give back.
Look, I would confess to you, I wouldn't at the top of my head have an answer. I do know that we have a number of programs and where we are trying to connect institutions and individuals in many ways in different sectors. I'm very familiar, of course, with the one with Israel. I was still in the government when that is done. But let me take a look at it because again, my sense is this changing India that I'm talking to you about. It's also in many ways much more open to ideas and experiences of others in different circumstances. So let me take a look, and certainly if there isn't a vehicle, I would like to think about one.
Hello, Dr. Jaishankar. This is Ramesh Mehta. I'm an Indian doctor working in National Health Service in UK. Congratulations that India has the best foreign minister India could have had. So well done. My question is about healthcare in India. Indian government expenditure, GDP-wise, is for Indian healthcare is very poor as compared to other countries. Modi Care is probably one of the best initiatives, but that's not good enough. What do you think should be the GDP spend on Indian healthcare for Indian population who really land in big trouble when they have an issue of healthcare?
I have a bit of a problem answering your question because I'm neither the health minister nor the finance minister. So it's very difficult for me to kind of pass a sweeping judgment on the health side or even to pluck a number, because one thing I learned in government that, when you pick one number, you've just reduced somebody else's number somewhere. So if you're making a broad case that India needs to spend more money on health, I don't think anybody would dispute that. If you are making the point that today Ayushman Bharat initiative, which the Prime Minister announced, has the potential to actually transform the Indian health landscape, I think that's an objective for which a lot of us are working for. There are, a lot. Look, bear in mind, it's not that easy in 5 years to bring about a radical change in a sector as complex as health. So even as I speak, emphasize the change and, point to a lot of it, you've got to also understand that for some of this to really throw up transformational results, it does take some time, it does take a lot of investment. And your sentiment is well taken, but again, a lot of the challenges in India are, if you are waiting, this is not just in health, okay? I mean, even in my much narrower, smaller domain, the challenge of governance is this. If you're going to wait for a scale up to do change, you're going to wait a long time. So typically, you've got what you've got, and you start making the changes. You try and optimize the limited resources, even as you are seeking more. So I think today digital intervention in a lot of areas probably would have a huge impact in terms of optimizing healthcare in India. But underlying all of that is actually, I think, a sharper sense of responsibility that today, 10 years ago, connection to electricity, access to a doctor, having a roof over your head, going to a halfway decent school, these were not seen as basic rights of people. These were seen as something a little beyond where you've progressed a bit. I think today this aspirational India expects better healthcare. And my sense is a lot of the changes in India, part of it is going to be driven by government policy and political leadership and vision. A lot of it is going to be driven bottom up from stronger expectations of the public.
Time for one more question down the front. Yeah.
Honorable Minister Jaishankar, my name is Subhas Thakra, former chair of the London Chamber of Commerce. Now we have the best of Prime Minister in India, and already been said, and the best of foreign ministers for India. How do you propose to tackle the Pakistan issue? We've done it in cricket, but how about in politics?
I wish sometimes politics was as neat as cricket. But first of all, I think we need to define the problem right. Okay, and I'm being very objective about this. I think a lot of the problem today is whether Pakistan is prepared to behave as a normal country and as a normal neighbor. Now, what do I mean by normal? I don't think anywhere in the world today, do you have a country which has an industry of people who are trained and armed and motivated to go and commit acts of terror in a neighboring country. There may be terrorist incidents from time to time. There may be, and UK has experienced some, sadly. But if you look at this kind of, large-scale as I said, industry of terrorism, which is done with the blessing of the state because the state thinks that it is an instrument of pressure on a neighbor. I think that's a pretty unique situation. And today, it's an increasingly unacceptable solution. It was always unacceptable to India, but I think more and more countries are coming around to that viewpoint. The second is, a basic issue. I mean, today, almost all countries trade with each other. Okay, not to trade is a very abnormal situation, and yet you have, forever, the Indians offered a MFN status, which is, the non-discriminatory trade to Pakistan, but Pakistan would not offer that to India. You also have that in something today which is very important, which is in connectivity. That if you look today at South Asia, goods of one South Asian country crisscross the other. Stuff comes from Nepal, passes through India, from Bangladesh, goes across somewhere else to Nepal or to Bhutan. But Pakistan is resistant to connectivity concerning India. So the challenge that I see is really if a country practices terrorism, denies normal trade, is obstructive on connectivity, how do I actually work with this country? So it's not an easy challenge. I think, we've struggled with it now for many, many years. It's not a challenge we can address alone, but I think it's not a challenge we should be addressing alone, because a lot of what Pakistan is doing today is affecting the rest of the world, including the United Kingdom. So I think that is today an issue on which we hope that there be stronger global consensus, that, whenever there's a deviation from frankly, good governance or common sense or call it rules of international relations, it's important for the international community not to look away, not to make excuses, not to play some kind of balancing game for its, political convenience. I think, countries which do the kind of things that we've seen happening need to be called out, need to be pressurized and persuaded to do the right thing. So, it's not that I have a pessimistic view of the relationship. Nothing would please me more than to see good India-Pakistan relations. But I also recognize in the given situation, it is probably among the hardest challenges we face.
You have a lot of work to do. We are grateful for your time. So thank you for joining us here at the conference. Ladies and gents, please put your hands together for the External Affairs Minister of India, Dr. Jay.
Thank you very much.